How do you stand out as a developer or software engineer in today's job market? Well, I'm talking with the person who wrote a book on the subject, in this episode of Dynamic Developer. I'm your host, Bill Detweiler. In this episode, I'm joined by Randall Khanna, a product lead for Trim and author of the book, The Standout Developer. I spoke with Randall in November 2020, but didn't have a chance to air the interview back then. Randall has an amazing story and great advice for developers of all levels, so I'm glad I can share our conversation with you now. Well, Randall, thank you for being here. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm honored.
So let's get right to it. You're a full stack engineer with Trim. You're also head of community for Gumroad. You've been a software engineer with companies like Base, Eventbrite, Ticketfly, which is now part of Pandora. That's a lot of sort of different experience, a lot of different companies. As a developer, because I want to talk a little bit about your new book in just a minute. What's your area of expertise, like as a developer? What's your day-to-day like at Trim right now?
Very busy. I like to stay exceptionally busy, and this year has been no exception. I'm mostly a front-end engineer. I've worked in some full stack. In the past, I've kind of had many hats that I've worn in different companies. I've worked in blockchain, iOS, back-end, front-end, you name it. Right now, I'm mostly focusing on React, and we have Rails on the back end at Trim. So pretty busy. I generally work my full 9 to 6 at Trim, and then I spend my nights and weekends working for Gumroad.
That's a lot on your plate. I have to ask you sort of because this is always a hot topic with developers. What's your favorite sort of languages that you're working on with now, or your favorite platforms?
Yeah, I've tried so many, and it's almost like, you go back to your your first love with Java, and for me, that was JavaScript. And I've done so many different things, and it's always kind of come back to that. So I'm sticking with that from now on.
So let's talk about how you got started as a developer. What was your first developer job, and what drew you to that career versus something else?
Yeah, I always loved to code. When I was 12, I was on Neopets.com, and I was selling websites online there and building little Pirates of the Caribbean fan guilds, which are actually still there, which are really embarrassing to look at now. And I loved it. I loved being on the computer. I loved typing. I would play typing games for hours. For context, I was homeschooled, so I had time to do that. But when I got to college, the major was just so impacted. There was just no real option to choose that as a major. I would have been in school for 8 years. And it was also kind of discouraged for women to major in computer science. And this was only, not too long ago, but there was just so many men in the major. My college counselor said, this is not going to be something that you're going to want to do. And after that, I didn't major, in college in computer science, and it was, slightly devastating, but moved on to different things. And then after college, could not get a job. I could not even get, a call back for an interview. My degree was basically useless. It was in communications, and it was highly demoralizing, to graduate college and then you have, a useless degree. And so I kind of found about coding boot camps in a very roundabout way. My aunt does a lot of research, sent me an email, and then I attended a boot camp, and it kind of all started going from there. I taught myself for about 8 or 9 months first before I went to the boot camp, which was probably overkill. Then attended a coding boot camp and got a job 2 weeks later at Ticketfly.
That's such a terrible, and it's an empowering and a positive story that I hope gives people hope, but it's also an extremely frustrating story because you weren't given the chance to sort of follow that passion because of stereotypes that still exist and existed then in college, and that is it's not only in one sense it's a detriment to the industry as a whole, it's a detriment to society as a whole, and it's also a huge just personal roadblock that you shouldn't have had to overcome.
Absolutely. Yeah, it was definitely very tough at the time. And I mean, it is true the industry is very hard to be a, woman engineer. It's still difficult. Things are much better than they were 5 years ago, but still definitely things to improve.
So, and speaking of that, I know you also have a younger sister who's a software engineer too. So, I mean, did your kind of love for code, you know, transfer over to her? Did she have a similar experience to you where, you know, she was doing something else? She had, or maybe had a degree in something else, but then decided, you know, I can do this. I like code. I'm seeing what Randall's doing, and I want to do the same thing.
Yeah, I think we were a very computer loving family growing up. And that kind of just transitioned into I became an engineer, and even she's even smarter than me by far. She taught herself completely how to code. She never attended a boot camp. She didn't have that kind of boost. She just kind of decided she wanted to look into it, and she pitched herself to a company, which I highly recommend everyone does if you're trying to get started in engineering. Just find someone who works at a company and pitch them on yourself. And that's what she did. And then she got an engineering job.
I hope people that listen to this, you know, see that as a story of possibility and empowerment, and you know, they can do that. Do you think it's easier now to do that than maybe it was when you first started? Because there's so many companies that offer online free or, you know, paid materials to help people learn to code.
Yes, absolutely. It is easier to learn how to code than ever before. And the community is just so supportive. People want you to succeed. I think it's the best time in the world to teach yourself how to code.
And what do you say to people maybe who are listening to this and, you know, they're not as sort of technically inclined as you were? Like, yeah, sure, they know how to use a computer, but you know, they know how to use a smartphone, and they know what apps are, things. But the thought of actually sitting down in front of a terminal, or, you know, a WYSIWYG editor or whatever, you know, SDK you're using, and typing in line after line of text and then wondering what happens, even if it's, you know, object oriented, or even if you're using sort of low code, no code, which I want to get your opinions on later. There are a lot of people who may see that as a barrier. What would you say to those people, to, to, who have that fear?
Yes, when I started out, I was definitely not very computer savvy. I could do some very basic things, but when I started teaching myself how to code, from the very beginning, I didn't have much experience. I kind of had been writing a few things of HTML or CSS in a notepad editor. And that was what I, thought was very savvy at the time. And then of course, you find out there's a million things you need to learn. You need to learn JavaScript. You need to learn how to use an editor. You have to use the terminal. You have to start writing tests. And there's just this frameworks and everything is going around. I think the number one thing for me is just sitting down and working on one tutorial at a time. For instance, Free Code Camp is a great resource. Free Code Camp is all online, completely free. It has so many courses you could not even imagine, and it's a very low barrier to entry there. You can literally get started from zero and just start coding. So I think if it seems overwhelming, you just have to really sit down on one of those kind of sites and just start learning and put time on your schedule every single day, which is what I did, the first 8 or 9 months of my coding journey.
Well, so let's talk about, you know, your journey now too, because not only do you have this full-time job, but you also have a fairly sizable social media presence. And you've got a new book that you've written, The Standout Developer, which I want to get to and talk about. And you've got, you had a book before that you, on O'Reilly, I guess, that you co-wrote. So you've got a lot on your plate right now. How do you find, before we talk about those individual things, I'm really interested, how do you find time to do all that with the full, like you said, 8 hours a day gig?
I'm probably doing a little bit too much. Cutting down on my screen time. I don't spend any time on my phone because I literally do not have the time, and being very efficient. I'm unfortunately waking up very early right now. I work late. I work weekends, which is kind of good timing with the pandemic. But I'm also lucky I don't have kids, so I don't have that kind of, time constraints. I'm very lucky right now in my life to have the time to be able to work 2 gigs. And I know most people cannot do that, but it's definitely very overwhelming. I work weekends, I work nights, I work mornings. Kind of my whole life is consumed by this, but it's so exciting to me to help people not only, improve their careers and get dev jobs, but to also now become creators, because there's a huge community out there that needs resources for learning how to code. And my Gumroad gig is a big part of that to help people. And I'm really passionate about it. So I guess that keeps me going.
I hear that from people who are very passionate. And, I used to do my day job, and then I was an adjunct professor in the evening. Oddly enough, in criminal justice and cybercrime a little bit, but that's a different story. But again, because I was passionate about doing it. So I think that really makes a big difference when you're able to sort of have that, it gives you that drive to keep doing it. So it's really good to hear that. So let's talk about that with Gumroad. Tell me what Gumroad is. And I know that's the platform for how you published your self-published your latest book. So tell me, what is Gumroad, and how did it help with the book?
Gumroad is an online platform for creators, and I published my second book there, the first self-published one. And I also posted my book on a few other platforms, and Gumroad did the best. My book made around $30,000 this year on that book, which is far more than I ever unfortunately made on my first O'Reilly book, which is kind of how it goes with tech books. But selling online this year kind of really changed my life. Last year I had no Twitter followers, I had no presence, I had no products online. And I was so passionate about writing a book, and thankful that O'Reilly kind of gave me the first chance and my first start and the first, structured experience with working with an editor. And that kind of led me to Gumroad and publishing my book there. And now I'm working as also the head of community at Gumroad, which has been an incredible experience, because I love helping creators, and we're creating all these free workshops and challenges every month, and Q&A sessions, and doing kind of everything we can and creating resources for people to create online, because that is huge in the tech community right now. We have all these developers there at home, and they want to create something, which is what I did this year. And there's so many more people like me who kind of want to share their knowledge online and create a side hustle, because it is 2020 and things are tough.
Well, so let's talk about that in terms of Gumroad. Like, besides developers or engineers, people, what other types of creators are on the site?
Everything you can imagine is created on Gumroad. There's art, there's comics, there's fiction books, there's regular books. You can sell access to a GitHub repository. Kind of the possibilities are just endless. Online courses of everything, any kind of different subject you can imagine it. The course is sold on Gumroad, and it really, everything goes directly to the creator. There's a tiny percentage that Gumroad takes, but it's far less than you would ever imagine, compared to like Amazon, for instance, which takes a massive percentage.
So Gumroad operates as a marketplace, and the platform. Beyond that, are there other resources at Gumroad for people that want to, market themselves, market books, market products on Gumroad?
So basically, you can create your Gumroad landing page and direct people there, and they do everything for you. It's kind of all set up to go. You can immediately put your product on there, start uploading it. And they also do creator spotlights, which is something that the CEO of Gumroad knows, a lot of the creators. He's very invested, and I think that's what I really appreciate about Gumroad. He really cares, and you can tell this is really important to him to help other people, which is something that comes through with now they're hiring me to work as the head of community and create more resources to help people become creators.
All right, so let's talk about your book. It's called The Standout Developer. What do you cover in the book? I looked at it briefly, and it seems to be a lot of career advice for developers.
Yeah, so my book is basically all about how you can stand out in your job hunt, because right now, competition is fiercer than ever in 2020, because everyone is hiring remotely, and the competition is very stiff and very fierce, and it's tough right now. So my book is kind of all about how you can stand out as a developer. Everything from working on your resume to cold emailing a company to creating an online presence to blogging to preparing for the interview process. So it's kind of everything that I wish I had known when I started out as an engineer and I was trying to job hunt.
So what are some of the big, I don't want to give away everything in the book, but what are some of the big takeaways that you can share with folks?
Yeah, I think for me, the biggest thing that I wish I knew when I was job hunting way back when was to kind of apply before you think you're ready. Because for me, I taught myself for 8 or 9 months. And at that point, I could have gotten a job, but I didn't feel like I was ready. So I then went to a boot camp and I spent a lot of money, and it was an incredible experience. It changed my life in many ways. But I didn't think I was ready before I went to the boot camp. So I kind of held myself back. So just kind of start applying, I think, sooner than you think, and see how that goes. And then also make sure that you have a great resume, and don't be afraid to cold email people and kind of find a company you're really passionate about and pitch yourself. And I think that's something that most people are really scared to do, but that can be the most powerful thing.
You know, I think I hear that a lot from people, especially starting out, is they do have that sense of sort of imposter syndrome, right? They don't realize like that their skills are good enough at a certain point to at least start or to get hired. So that's great advice. You know, go out there, try to get hired, and maybe someone will say yes, and you might get 1,000 no's. But if you get one yes, then that's one step closer to the goal. Another thing that you talked about, and I've read some of your posts online about this, is the importance of sort of that external persona. You were talking about, you know, your profile online, making sure you have a really good resume. How important as a developer is it these days, whether you're job hunting or just as sort of part of general career development, to have some online persona, hopefully a good one?
Hopefully, a good one for sure. I think that it helps you to kind of stand out, and it gets companies reaching out to you, which is so powerful because you don't have to go and have to apply to a million companies and hope something comes back, because you've created this presence where companies want to reach out to you. And for instance, last year I had almost no presence. I had a few blog posts, and I was still getting companies reaching out to me. And this year, because I have a large Twitter following and I'm creating resources and kind of showing my work and kind of creating in public, in a way, I have so many companies reaching out to me every day, and I've literally lost count. I can't respond to most emails, and it's astronomical how much better my career prospects are now, just because I've created a Twitter account and written more blog posts online. So it's, you know, an easy thing to do, and it has such a high return because companies will find you.
And so, what was, and you've written about this a little bit. So, what was it? What did you do to help sort of build that sizable following? I think you've got over 30,000 Twitter followers right now, and you'll probably get a few more after this. You know, there's one or two people that listen to this and watch these videos. So, you know, maybe you'll get one or two more. But how did you go about sort of building that Twitter following?
Well, originally last year, I was sharing a lot of dog photos, and as cute as my dog is, it was not getting much traction. People are not interested. So I kind of started shifting my focus to thinking about what could help other people and what would provide value in their lives. And that was just a huge breakthrough for me. I also took a Twitter course from Daniel Vassallo, who is this ex-Amazon engineer, fascinating person who quit his job at Amazon to sell products on Gumroad. And as soon as I kind of realized I needed to focus on helping people, and I didn't really even do it as to grow a Twitter following, I thought, oh, maybe I'll get, you know, a few followers. But I started sharing resources on how to improve your resume and where you can job hunt, and resources I've accumulated over the last 6 years as an engineer. And everything just kind of started blowing up. I was getting 8,000 to 10,000 followers a month when I was starting to do that. But more importantly, it was, you know, so satisfying to help people, and so many people have found jobs because of my book. And that was, you know, far greater than any follower count could ever be.
Was it something that you were in, obviously when you started doing it, you were intentional about it. After getting a job as a developer, what was it that sort of led you to sort of decide to sort of build this personal brand, saying, you know, I need to do something beyond what I'm doing now? What was it, that desire to sort of help people, to sort of make a difference, to give back? What was your thought process? Because I imagine a lot of people are out there, they're working 10 hours a day, they're working 12 hours a day, even if they're working 8 hours a day, but have 50 other things sort of happening. You know, you talked about sort of the passion a little bit earlier, but you know, it is they might be thinking, well, that's great if you have all this time, you know, if to invest in kind of building a social media following, but I really don't, I can't do it. Is it possible to be more purposeful, I guess, in the time that you do spend there to do it? Or is it like it takes hours and hours and hours and hours every day?
No, it is not something that takes hours. I think that's what I thought too. I thought there was a huge barrier, and I was like, oh, I don't want to sit on Twitter. I don't want to be creating, YouTube videos and blog posts. That's going to be, how would that help me as an engineer? And then, I started very slowly, maybe 1 or 2 tweets a day that I thought would help someone and provide value in their career. I did free resume reviews, online for people for free. And it wasn't something that took hours. Writing up a quick tweet or engaging with someone online or working on a blog post, it doesn't take that long. And for instance, working on a blog post helps you because you learn while you're writing that and you find gaps in your own knowledge. So it's such a powerful thing to do. It's really just an investment. And I think hopefully your employer will also support you in doing that because, it also helps them if you're building a presence online.
I think that's something that's also kind of interesting. That seems to be a change from say 10 years ago, that employers are much more interested in having, and even will allow it, is having their employees do those kind of extracurricular things, so long as it's within certain sort of corporate communication kind of boundaries and all that kind of stuff. I mean, but have you found that to be the case at the companies that you've worked for?
Well, I think I wouldn't work for a company at this point that wasn't, happy with that for me personally. But I've definitely found that a lot of companies are very open to developers kind of creating outside their job. And, some people don't have the time, and that's totally understandable. It is a crazy year. But I think anything that you build online also helps them, increases visibility, and it gets, more people interested in working at that company.
Let's talk about this crazy year, and we're going into hopefully not as crazy a year in 2021, but there's still going to be a lot of, lingering effects of the lockdowns that we've gone through and permanent changes to the job market and to hiring trends. As an engineer, as someone who is working with other developers, as someone who's looking at sort of career prospects in next year, what are you seeing around sort of trends in developer careers in 2021? Well, because you kind of talked about it. You talked about how I think so. You talked about, now that everyone's working remotely, the job market is much tighter because companies can now recruit from anywhere. Not that they couldn't before. The technology was getting there, but I think that's really been accelerated. You look at companies that are trying to build sort of, maybe they had digital transformation efforts already underway, but now they said, we've got engineers, we've got developers working remotely. We need to be able to deploy from everywhere. We need to make sure that we have the tools in place. So those maybe, weren't there, but that's going to continue. So that's kind of what I'm curious about your impressions of is like, and how do developers prepare themselves for that? Like, how do you stand out when you can be, if you live in one geographic area and that's where the company's headquarters is, but maybe now they're recruiting from all over the world. And so now you're competing with a lot more people, or now you have to work remotely. And how is that? That's kind of a challenge too. So that's just kind of what I'm curious about.
Yeah, it's definitely a very challenging time for developers job hunting. I think because companies can hire, say in South Carolina or somewhere cheaper, for instance, Ohio, and you can live wherever and work wherever, you have people applying from all around the world for the same job. And, before I was working in San Francisco before the pandemic hit and applying for jobs in San Francisco. And because I was here, there's certain jobs that are only here, but now those companies are expanding. Trim is also expanding and hiring all over the world. And because of that, you have to find a way to stand out, which is kind of why I wrote my entire book, just find ways, to improve your resume and improve your presence. And I know those are kind of unpleasant things to think about if you don't want to have an online presence, but it's definitely going to help you in 2021 to stand out.
What else has been a challenge for you as a developer working remotely, right? And managing your career, helping with the community over at Gumroad. How have you what challenges have you faced and how have you overcome those?
I personally love working remote and I'm never going to go back into an office. I personally was an open office in SF. You're almost always sick because someone comes in sick, and kind of, you feel expected to come in even if you don't feel that great. And because of that, I was always sick, and there was always people talking in the office or going out or having long lunches. And because I'm, forced now to work remote, I can really focus on, what's important and getting my work done and enjoying the rest of my day, because I don't have those, constraints where you have to be, 9 to 6 sitting in an office. I can be more efficient with my time, which has really helped me grow as an engineer.
Yeah, I've heard similar stories from a lot of folks, and I know there are ways that people are still trying to maintain some of those sort of connections that they maybe had. So the positive parts of sort of being in the office. So being able to pop your head up over the desk or the cube and say, "Hey, what about this?" Or and so I would say, what as a developer, do the tools, whether it's Zoom or whether it's Slack or WebEx or however, Teams or Hangouts or whatever the kind of Asana, whatever you're using, sort of those collaboration tools. Do those work well for you? Do they work well with the teams that you're part of?
Absolutely. I think it's up to each company to kind of regulate how remote employees work together and how it's sustainable. For instance, at Trim, we have office hours. So each engineer has a few hours they put on their calendar. Anyone can pop in. They'll be online in a Google Hangout, or Zoom. And it's been a really powerful thing because it kind of stimulates that pop, over the desk kind of thing and ask, for help or a question. So I think that's one really big way that we've been kind of trying to combat that. And everyone kind of having core hours is another way. So there's a certain amount of hours each day that you're expected to be online, but obviously realistic about breaks. But that's another way that employers can help kind of regulate remote employees right now.
I'd love to end this with, if there was one thing, and you alluded to this earlier, if there was one thing that you wish you had known, you talked about the job, wishing you'd applied earlier. Besides that, if there's one thing that you wish you'd know when you first started that you could, a bit of wisdom to give to people listening, what would it kind of be?
I would have started building a presence online far earlier, because I had so many amazing opportunities, like you having me on the show, for instance, more job opportunities and podcast interviews, my book, everything like that kind of came from building an online presence, because that we are living in a digital world and it is crucial to do that. And then also people in tech, they really want to help you get your first job. There's nothing more satisfying to me than someone saying they got my book and, I helped them get a dev job. So the community is very welcoming. Don't feel afraid to cold email someone. Don't feel worried, that they're going to, hate you or be upset you wasted their time. Just, kind of start reaching out to people and see what happens.
Well, Randall, that is great advice. I really appreciate you taking the time out of your day to be here. And thank you to all our viewers and listeners for joining us. You can listen to more episodes of Dynamic Developer on your favorite podcast platform, or watch a video of each episode, as well as read a transcript at Tech Republic.